My name is Wesley Harrod. In the year 1884, when I was 40 years of age, I took office in the United States Congress, representing the state of Virginia. I found myself dealing with all manner of political issues that year, large and small. One of the most minor required me to sit on an unpublicized committee whose charge it was to deal with a growing problem in some large eastern cities, namely, the fleecing of the public by spiritualists and fortune-tellers. There was no regulation on such activities then, and complaints about shysters passing themselves off as mediums and psychics poured into politicians' files at a shocking rate. The problem became so great that Congress itself appointed 5 men to hold informal hearings on the subject. I became involved with the committee as a favor to a colleague. On one of my first vacation days from Congress, I volunteered to attend a seance with another congressman, Mr. Thomas Branch of Georgia, to see for ourselves what sort of hucksterism was being passed off in Washington. The seance was held in a brownstone at 11th Street and C by a Mrs. Evelyn Crowdy, who charged a handful of spectators $4 each to witness her attempt to contact the deceased wife of a man named Grantham. He and I sat in a dark living room with 3 other men and watched as Mrs. Crowdy blew out every candle in the room, then took Mr. Grantham's hand to begin the ceremony. Mr. Grantham had been visibly aggrieved from the moment he entered the house, and the atmosphere was spectacularly unsettling. I was already quite angered at Mrs. Crowdy's indifference toward her guest's plight. What a cruel sham she had staged, I thought. What cheek to do this to a suffering man. After a couple of minutes of silence, Mrs. Crowdy addressed the spirit world at length, and eventually spoke directly to Grantham's wife. Crowdy invited her to make her presence known through sound. It was raining that night, and soon after Crowdy stopped speaking, all of us waiting in silence for any sort of sign from the beyond, we did hear one anomalous sound mixed in with the rain. The single sharp clanging of one metallic object against another, coming from outside the house, down below on the street. At length, Crowdy asked Mrs. Grantham's spirit to make the sound again. From the street, the sound was repeated. I formed the assumption that Mrs. Grantham must have an assistant out on the street somewhere. My colleague, Mr. Branch, assumed the same thing. Branch knew that in the almost total darkness, he could leave his chair and maneuver slightly toward the window so that he could get a good look outside without Mrs. Crowdy seeing him. So he waited for her to ask for another sound, and then made his subtle move. But when the third clanging came, he could see no one out on the street. I temporarily stopped thinking about some deceitful swindle as Mrs. Crowdy continued to speak, for I had begun to feel physically strange, overly warm and uncomfortable. I suffered with the curious and unpleasant sensation that my skin was wet all over, yet I was not sweating. Then came something truly unsettling. While my night vision should have been virtually useless in the pitch dark, I began to make out the images of Crowdy and Grantham and the others through the blackness, fuzzily at first, but then more and more clearly. Within minutes, I could see almost everything in some detail, but utterly without color. I saw that the candles in the room were still unlit, and this seemed to prove that my mind was playing a bizarre trick on me. I saw Mrs. Crowdy's hand tighten its grip on Mr. Grantham's. Her eyes were shut in the dark, and her head was cocked back as far as was humanly possible, as if she were being forced to stare at something on the ceiling in a spot behind her. Mrs. Crowdy asked Mr. Grantham to speak to his wife. There followed a long, sad, trembling monologue from Grantham to the woman, in which he begged her to show herself in some way, to come back to him whenever she could. Then there was something else when I turned my head to the right. I saw a woman sitting in one of the chairs Mrs. Crowdy had set out for us, beside one of the other spectators. The woman, previously unnoticed, was perhaps in her 20s. She seemed to be able to see in the dark as well. She turned her face to me at length, unsmiling. At that point, I closed my eyes, wanting desperately to be away from the room. I didn't understand what was happening. Only a sudden shout caused me to open my eyes again. When I did, the woman was gone. The shout interrupted Mr. Grantham's monologue. It came from the street outside. A woman had cried, "See me," in harsh tones. Mrs. Crowdy announced that she was going to light a candle, and that her connection to the spirit world had been broken. Even before the candle was lit, I saw that there was something wrong with the woman's eyes. The newly born flame made it clear to everyone else as well. Both her eyes had puffed up and become severely bruised during her trance. She looked as if she had been punched, not just once, but several times. Then everything saw what was most chilling, which was that Mr. Grantham bore a line of words across the front of his neck. Upon closer examination, all in the room deduced that the words had somehow been made with regular India ink. They said, "Herod will see me forever." Mrs. Crowdy did not know the names of her spectators. She asked us if anyone named Herod was in the room, and I was forced to acknowledge that this was my name. A panicked Mr. Grantham wanted to know what the message meant. I assured the man that I had no knowledge of his wife, and was a stranger in town just looking for amusement. Mrs. Crowdy told the group that she would normally try again to contact Mrs. Grantham's spirit, but that the circumstances now seemed impossible, and she advised everyone to go home. On my journey from the house, the sensation of wet skin faded slowly, and my vision returned to normal. Comparing memories the next day, Mr. Branch and I were honestly flabbergasted as to how Mrs. Crowdy had achieved her effects. I told him nothing of my personal trauma during the seance. Mrs. Crowdy requested to see me a few days later, having discovered my true political identity. I agreed to come to her house on a Sunday afternoon. There, her eyes still somewhat swollen, Mrs. Crowdy told me that it had not been Mrs. Grantham's spirit that tried to contact us some nights before. It had been someone else, and that someone had intended to frighten me specifically, and the spirit had been extremely powerful and vengeful. She asked if anyone, particularly any woman, had cause to antagonize me. I did not tell her that I had recognized the woman who appeared to me in the darkness. It was a woman I had known under horrible circumstances 7 years before. It had all taken place in the Washington suburb of Falls Church, when I was nothing more than a town selectman who owned a small grocery store, 2 years before I decided to run for higher office in 1879. One of my almost daily customers was a docile young woman named Shirley Frost. She almost never said a word to me in the 6 months I attended to her at the store. Then, one day, she unexpectedly ventured to engage me in some shy small talk, and then asked if she could tell me something in confidence. Her husband, a man named Hugh, had become increasingly delusional, and seemed to be losing his mind. She didn't know what to do. Right there in the store, she began to cry. I was completely confused, at a loss, so I only told the woman that she should talk to her family about the problem. Secretly, I hoped she wouldn't return to the store again, but she kept coming back, though she once again lapsed into silence, offering only a polite hello and responding to my "how are you" inquiries with polite detachment. But I sensed the woman was becoming more and more troubled. One day, I finally felt the obligation to ask her if her troubles had been resolved. When she began to lose control of herself again, I closed the store and ushered her to the storage room, where I asked her to tell me how bad things really were. The year before, she said, her once normal husband had begun to imagine she was conspiring against him, to send him to jail for poisoning a dog that had continually run onto their property. And he sometimes accused her of hiding evidence of her plots inside graves at a nearby cemetery. He began to buy books about witchcraft, in order to foil her black magic with his own, he said. He had even attempted several spells, to no avail, of course, and when his attempts at witchcraft went awry, he locked himself inside their bedroom out of fear that his wife might kill him. Just the night before, she had served him dinner he would not eat, claiming his books had told him that any meal prepared by her would cause his blood to boil and rot. He said she was leaving him no choice but to consider summoning a demon to protect himself. Hugh Frost had stopped working, and there was almost no money left. The doctor she had seen offered to do nothing until her husband became a danger to someone. She had no family besides a very elderly mother, and no friends. She practically begged me to help her, claiming that I was the kindest person she knew personally. I told her that I just didn't know what to do, and I was sorry. She asked if it was possible that she could come to my home and stay there for just a little while. She found it unbearable to sleep in the same room as her increasingly deranged, increasingly silent husband. I couldn't agree to this. I wouldn't know what to tell my wife. So Shirley Frost left the store, visibly devastated, and she never returned. A week went by, and my guilt and fear mounted. I decided to take Mrs. Frost's monthly grocery bill to her personally. I took her address for my files and walked a mile to her home in Arlington. When I got there, I sensed the house was empty even before I knocked on the door. When my hand struck the wood, the door creaked open halfway. When no one answered my greeting, I walked inside. I found a house emptied of almost all possessions and furniture. Mrs. Frost and her husband had vacated. I walked through the house, baffled. I saw nothing that hinted at anything sinister, and then I forced myself to descend into the dark cellar, which received only a little bit of light coming in from the open front door. I saw something down there, large letters possibly, marked on the floor, which was nothing more than packed, smooth dirt. But I could not make them out in the dark. I left the empty house, walked down the street to purchase a candle, and then returned. Back in the cellar, I lit the candle and held the flame as close to the floor as I could, moving it in a wide circle to slowly make out the markings etched into the dirt. Little by little, it became obvious that what I was looking at was a pentagram. Someone had tried to obscure it by kicking dirt over it, but enough of it remained to identify it. Remembering the possible significance of a pentagram from some readings at university, I backed out of the cellar quickly, deeply afraid that whoever made the design might suddenly return. I went back home, and my life resumed. I never saw nor heard from Mrs. Frost again. My real career in politics began shortly afterward. I left the psychic Mrs. Crowdy's house in a deeply frightened state. I had told her very little about myself and nothing about Mrs. Frost. I hoped the whole episode would just fade away. I managed to excuse myself from any more dealings with the committee looking into fraudulent fortune-tellers. After a month of unsettling feelings, unable to make peace with what I had experienced at Mrs. Crowdy's seance, I walked to her house late at night and made an appointment with her servant. Now I planned to tell her everything. My conscience was killing me. I had refused to read any of Mrs. Crowdy's messages to me after our first talk. These had come once a week and went right into the trash bin. The essence of these messages was that I should come to see her again as soon as humanly possible. When I showed up at Mrs. Crowdy's house at 11 p.m. on October 21, 1884, she told me that 2 seances since the one I had witnessed had been disrupted by the spirit who had tried to frighten me that first time. She asked if I was ready to tell her everything. I finally did. My relief lasted only a minute. Crowdy told me that only through another seance could she use her channeling powers to ask the spirit of Shirley Frost to stay away from me. Mrs. Frost had obviously died at some point. There was no other explanation, and now she was viciously angry with me. No spirit, Mrs. Crowdy said, had ever physically punished her as Frost's had, blackening her eyes. And it was a terrible sign, she claimed, that I had been able to see her sitting in an empty chair in the dark. I did not want to sit for a seance. I most definitely did not believe in ghosts. All I had really wanted was to unburden myself, or so I thought. After an hour of Crowdy's pleading, I agreed to sit for just 30 minutes or so while she attempted to channel Shirley Frost's spirit. I thought that perhaps I could achieve some sort of closure just through this simple, harmless act. The candles were blown out, and Crowdy took my hand. She informed me that I was in no danger tonight, that she would not allow certain pathways of her mind to be manipulated. The seance truly began. I kept my eyes shut tight. Soon I heard Crowdy groaning strangely, and when I asked if she was all right, she did not respond. As the minutes passed, I sensed her moving in her chair. Her breathing became audibly ragged. At about the 20-minute mark, I thought I could hear a human voice, shouting as if from down multiple corridors, muffled and desperate, and I would have sworn that the voice was coming right in front of me somehow, somewhere deep inside Mrs. Crowdy's throat. 30 minutes after the seance began, Mrs. Crowdy suddenly tore her hand from mine, and I heard her chair rock back and almost topple over. She got up and lit a few candles. When I saw her face in the new gloom, I was shocked and appalled. Her eyes had again been blackened somehow. Now, too, there were dark red marks on her throat. The marks very clearly represented a large handprint, as if someone had tried to strangle the woman. Mrs. Crowdy told me that she had spent 5 full minutes in contact with the spirit of Shirley Frost. In that time, the woman I had known only briefly 7 years before had sworn bloody vengeance on me. She despised me for my inaction which she believed led directly to her death. I was horrified to realize that her husband had actually killed her. But Mrs. Crowdy said that this was not strictly the case. Mrs. Frost had died only a week after her husband had suddenly moved them to Boston, but it wasn't her husband's hand which committed the murder. Mrs. Crowdy claimed that Shirley Frost was killed by a demon. This demon's name was Taz-Ku-Nil. It had been raised by her husband. This demon had caused her unimaginable pain for 2 whole days. Before it died, it tore her body apart. Mrs. Crowdy told me she had been able to see the demon for a full second during her trance. The spirit of Shirley Frost had shown it to her. Seeing it, Crowdy whispered to me, was like dying. In that one moment I believed everything, as insane as it seemed. I asked Mrs. Crowdy what I could do to ask for Mrs. Frost's forgiveness. Mrs. Crowdy believed there was nothing I could do. Trembling, she told me that the seance had been a terrible mistake. Having been made so physically and mentally weak during that time in the dark, she had allowed Mrs. Frost's spirit to gain too much entry into the living world. And such a spirit, which bore almost no resemblance to the person Mrs. Frost may have once been, would try to torture me in any way she could. Her anger was eternal. She had implanted these words in Mrs. Crowdy's mind again and again. Herod will see me forever. And all Mrs. Crowdy could do was urge me to pray, attend church, be calm. I lived under great stress after that night, and less than 2 weeks later, the affliction which would drive me to the brink of insanity struck. I beheld the image of Shirley Frost standing in the middle of Constitution Avenue one day, watching me as I spoke to a colleague. When I looked directly at her face, I saw that her gaze was cold and lifeless. When I looked away, I expected the frightening image to vanish, but it didn't. As my colleague continued to speak with me, the specter of Shirley Frost appeared everywhere I looked, always the same distance away, about 50 feet. I realized that if I moved my left arm, the specter did the same. When I put a hand to my forehead, so did Shirley Frost. I was being mirrored, a mocking gesture that both enraged and terrified me. I excused myself from my conversation and began to walk back to the Capitol building. When I did, the specter did the same, walking with her back to me, taking the same steps, walking down the same hallways. I did not know it then, but from that moment on, I would see Shirley Frost in my field of vision for the rest of my days. The mirroring continued day and night, even when I was in my home. Sitting in my living room, I saw the specter in the corner. When I ate my dinner, accompanied by my wife, I could see in my peripheral vision the specter putting food into her mouth as well. There were times when the mirroring stopped, but Shirley Frost never went away as long as my eyes were open. She was never more than 50 feet or so away from me. She stood in the corner of my bedroom. She sat in the corner of my office in the Capitol building, sometimes mimicking the shuffling of papers or the signing of a document. She never spoke. I soon stopped looking directly at her, for to look at her face was to bring myself closer and closer to suicide. When I realized that the specter was permanent, I consulted doctor after doctor about it, but nothing they tried worked for me. I was forced to tell my wife the entire story. She remained by my side to help me. My record as a congressman became marked by absenteeism and extended medical leaves. I resigned my post 6 months before completing my first term, telling my constituents that my eyesight was rapidly failing and I would soon be blind. I quickly disappeared from public life. Even before that, my friends and colleagues never saw me without dark glasses on. I told them that a congenital problem had taken my eyesight. The truth was that only when I was banished to total darkness did the image of Shirley Frost leave me be. I was safe with my eyes closed. 1 year and 11 months after leaving office, I embarked upon a secret trip to Boston in order to visit the grave of Shirley Frost. I knelt there and begged for her forgiveness, my eyes shut tight so that I would not see her image mirroring me in the cemetery. Afterwards, I went into a nearby pub for a drink, and entering the dim bathroom, I removed my dark glasses and took a few minutes, as I did each day, to see. In the mirror, I was confronted with the fact that my eyes had mysteriously become bruised and puffy, as if struck. I then saw the image of Shirley Frost standing almost directly behind me, closer than she had ever come. She was less than 3 feet from me. In very confined spaces, she had always still appeared to be some distance away, but not now. What's more, she had changed. Her once sadly pretty face was a dark and sickly gray. Her eyes were clouded with cataracts, and for the first time, her mouth was severely bloodied. There was a long gash on her neck more than an inch deep. Patches of her hair appeared to have been ripped from her head, leaving wounds. When I saw her, I screamed and ran out of the bathroom. I bolted through the patrons of the pub, and I kept going. In another pub, I drank myself into a stupor. Sometime after midnight, my drunken ramblings took me to a back-alley tattoo artist, to whom I crazily offered $100 if he could refer me to a medical man who would sew my eyelids permanently shut. I was ejected onto the street again, wanting only to die. The solution to my agony was found in a bottle of vodka which I first emptied into my throat and then broke over a park bench. It was in that park, just before dawn, that I blinded myself with a shard of jagged glass. I awoke in a hospital bed, a ruined man, but a free one. Thus, the past 9 years of my life have been utterly without sight, but I have not seen Shirley Frost again. If the woman has any mercy in her soul, she will appear just once, even inside my useless eyes, so that the shock of being so close to her will carry me away from this world. Let the annals of political history write that Wesley Herod was a fair and just public servant, and make no mention of the sickness that removed me from office and destroyed my soul. And let me be buried, not in Washington, but in the Boston cemetery where Shirley Frost lies, in a last attempt to atone for a sin I never meant to commit.